This is not your average pleasure cruise. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome or welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thanks for spending some time with me. So today I'm really excited to do a review of the Liveship Traders trilogy. This is the second trilogy in the Realm of the Elderling saga by Robin Hobb. So let's just start by saying I loved this trilogy. I thought it was great, and I actually think it was better than the Farseer trilogy, which is the trilogy that preceded it. So really quickly, for those who don't know, the Realm of the Elderlings is a 16-book saga written by Robin Hobb, but it's split up into 5 separate story arcs that are all interconnected. The first one is the Farseer trilogy, and this one, the Liveship Traders, is the second trilogy. Then you have the Tawny Man trilogy, which is coming up next, then the Rainwild Chronicles, which is a quadrilogy, and then the series ends with the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. Now, the first, third, and fifth of those story arcs follow the same character, and the second and fourth follow different characters. So you can actually read the Liveship Traders trilogy, not having read the Farseer trilogy. And you'll miss out on a few things here and there, but overall the story stands on its own, even though it does an incredible amount of world building and expanding what you think you knew about the world that existed as explained in the first trilogy. Now, one of the most impressive things to me about this trilogy, after having read the Farseer trilogy first, is how much it deepened my respect for Robin Hobb as a writer, and it shows off her incredible range. Because the Farseer trilogy is written all as a retrospective first person. So we follow a main character, and he is remembering his life and writing a history of the Six Duchies. That's the area he's from. And so the whole story is written in this really intimate first person. It's very interior. It's very deliberately paced. Some would say it's slow. I think it's deliberately paced. You can go see my review of the Farseer trilogy to see my full thoughts on it. But the tone and the writing is this very emotional, tender, intimate kind of writing that, like I said, since it's first person, you have this interiority to the character that really makes you as a reader complicit. Now, the Liveship Trader trilogy is not like that at all. It has many different character points of view, and it's very fast moving, and it's very dynamic in that way. And let's go ahead and get some of the criticism of this trilogy out of the way at the beginning, because I can appreciate the criticism even if I don't share it. The criticism is that it is long, and maybe too long. And you know what? That's true. Each of the books in this trilogy is right around 900 pages. So it is a hefty trilogy to get through. And more importantly, it's really one long narrative. At the end of the first book, so the 3 books are the Ship of Magic, the Mad Ship, and the Ship of Destiny. At the end of the Ship of Magic, there are some small storylines that are wrapped up, but the big storyline isn't even started being wrapped up yet. And the same thing, at the end of the Mad Ship, you do have some resolutions, but really, there are more questions than there are answers. And the whole story isn't wrapped up until the end of the Ship of Destiny. So it really is like one long 2,700 page saga. And if you aren't ready to commit to that, just reading the first book, you'll probably be disappointed because most of the storylines, end with more questions than answers. And I can appreciate that criticism. It is long. And I'm sure there are some little escapades that could be shaved off. Maybe 100 pages here, another 100 pages there over the course of these 2,700 pages that would make it tighter to some extent. But the thing is, this story isn't about these individual escapades. It's about the characters. And that is what is so beautiful about it. You have this wide, diverse array of characters, and each of them go on these really complicated inner journeys. And that is what you're following across these 3 books, okay? And Robin Hobb's ability to write really compelling characters, the ones you love and the ones you hate, and the ones who are in between. There's no character that you just don't have a feeling about because the characters all bring something to the table. And so even though some of their escapades or some of the exploits in the series, they aren't central to the quote-unquote plot, to the main narrative, and if you took them out, the events of the main narrative may or may not happen rather similarly. They play an important part in the characters' inner journeys, and so they all feel relevant. And more importantly, at least from my perspective, is even though these books are long, they never felt long. They read really fast, right? They don't have the same type of intimacy that the first person narration has, since they're all written in an omniscient third person narrator. They don't have that same type of intimacy. And when you're moving from one character to the next, even in the span of a single chapter, there is, like I said, it's very dynamic. There's constant movement. And as the stories progress and you have more and more characters come in, you have multiple storylines that are happening all over the place. And so you're moving from one storyline to the next, which you see how they are slowly weaving in and out of each other. And you trust that they're all going to come together, which they do in the end. But because of that, you never feel like you're sitting still. So I never felt the weight or the length of these novels. even though they are so long, they move really quickly, and they're real, at least for me, they were real page turners, and I appreciated every single page. So there is a criticism, and it's valid, that they're long, they're hefty, and you have to really read all three. It's one kind of epic saga, as opposed to three standalone books that happen to be connected. Those are all valid criticisms, and so it's worth knowing that going into it. From my side, that criticism didn't bother me. I can see that, I can appreciate it, but I felt the story was fast moving, I thought the story was dynamic, and I thought that having a story focused on characters allowed Robin Hobb to take those kind of tangents and to bring her characters in all sort of unexpected places and add meaning to who the characters were, right? And add meaning to their journey so that when they come back together, there is profound transformation that happens on the part of almost every single character. So with that said, what is this about? I'm going to try to give a brief explanation because the plot, like I said, is almost secondary. Our story really follows one family as well as some ancillary characters that are connected to that family. And the family lives in a place called Bingtown. Bingtown is a trader's outpost, right, on the cursed shore. So a group of settlers left this main country of Jamalia, and they traveled to the cursed shore and they settled there, as well as in the Rain Wilds, which is up the river from Bingtown, though it's more inhospitable to live there. And so that is where these traders live. What makes them special is that a number of them have ships made out of what is called wizard wood. Wizard wood is the special wood that only comes from the Rain Wilds and has a lot of extra special properties insofar as that it's near indestructible, and it is just really great for making ships in general. The real special thing, though, is that when you have a ship made of wizard wood and 3 generations of that ship's owners die on the ship, that causes the ship to come to life, to quicken, and the ships become these sentient things. And as a result of that, obviously they are better at sailing, they can go places that other ships can't go, because in addition to a talented captain, the ship itself, is able to navigate. And because of that, the ships are incredible opportunities for trade. But even aside from the ships being sentient and alive, the ships themselves are able to travel up the Rain Wilds River to the Rain Wilds, and the Rain Wilds it includes the area where the Elderlings, these mythical creatures of the past who play an important role, obviously, in this whole trilogy, being called the Realm of the Elderlings, their ruined cities are up the Rain Wilds River. Now, other ships can't go up this river because it's quite acidic. It'll eat away at the ships. But the Wizardwood can travel up the river, and there's all sorts of treasures to be found. So a lot of the wealth of this area comes from their ability to trade on these things they find in the ruins of the Elderling cities. And that's all thanks to Wizardwood. Never mind the fact that once the Wizardwood quickens and the ships become alive, they just become much more effective ships in general. And you develop a relationship between the ship and the family that lives on the ship and that owns the ship. In order for a ship not to go crazy or to go mad, which, is a hint for the second book, Mad Ship, a blood relative of the ship has to be on the ship at all times, which plays a big role in where our story goes. As far as being related to the Farseer trilogy, the most important thing to know is that the Farseer trilogy, so the preceding trilogy, takes place in a place called the Six Duchies, and there's a war happening there. It's done by the time the Liveship Trader trilogy starts. But as a result of that war, there is great economic instability because all of the people we follow in the Liveship Trader trilogy are, they live off of commerce, and war disrupts that commerce. So this economic instability has affected all of Bingtown. And as a result of that, that is part of the instigating circumstances that our characters find themselves in. So at the very beginning of our book, the patriarch of our family, Ephron, he dies on the ship, and the ship quickens. So we have a living live ship. That is how our story starts, and we follow the rest of his family. Now, the rest of his family, there is the matriarch, Veronica. There are 2 daughters, one of whom, Althea, is the younger of the daughters. She has been sailing her whole life, so she believes she's going to inherit this ship. That is the unspoken expectation of her and most other people in her family, or so she thinks. And then the older sister, Kefria, she has married another sailor named Kyle, but he is not from Bingtown. He's from a neighboring country who have a whole different set of ideals. And they have 3 children, the eldest being a son named Wintro, the middle being a daughter named Malta, and then the youngest being a son named Selden. And all of these characters end up playing important roles in the story as we get into the second and third books. They don't all play a big role in the beginning, but by the time we get to the third book, all of these characters have their own storylines happening. In addition to those, we have a few other characters that come in and out. There is a pirate named Kenneth. We spend a good amount of time with this pirate. And then there are a few other important characters that come into the lives of our main characters. But really, it's focused on this family. And so at the beginning, after Ephron dies, Althea believes she's going to inherit his ship, but she doesn't. It goes to Kyle instead. And because there needs to be a blood relative on the ship, he forces Wintrow to be a ship's boy. Now, Wintrow was at a monastery. He was a priest. He was committed to the priesthood when he was a young boy. And now I think he's 13 or 14 at the beginning of the series, and all he wants to do is live in his monastery. But he's told he can't. He has to do his duty to the family. And so he has to live on the ship, which he's resentful of. And the story starts with him having this real battle, this emotional battle of wanting to be a good priest of Sa. So Sa is the kind of overarching deity they believe in, but Sa exists in all things. So at least the way that the people that believe in Sa think about Sa is that it's a very pluralistic idea that Sa manifests in all living beings, and all other religious beliefs, whatever gods other people worship, are really just Sa in disguise. So it's kind of this overarching religious idea. But you do get to see him at the monastery at the very beginning when he's called to go home. And he doesn't know that he's going home for good. He thinks he's just going to visit his grandfather on his grandfather's deathbed. So you get to have a little taste of his life in the monastery. And that is all he yearns to go back for. And so obviously I'm a monk, so it makes sense that he's my favorite character. He really is my favorite character. The journey he goes on and how he transforms as a person throughout these 3 books is phenomenal. The 3 books take place over about 2 years, I think maybe a little longer. So like I said, the story is focused on this one family. So you have the people that are sailing. So once Ephron dies, Kyle and Wintrow are sailing on their live ship. Ronica is at home with Kefria, trying to navigate the homestead, right? Everything, there is such economic distress, and there's all these new people coming into Bingtown, whether from other countries like Chalced, or from, Bingtown is really like a colony of Jamila, which is like where the satrap, the political leader, lives. So they're essentially a colony. And so there are people coming from Jamila and from Chalced and from other like fishing villages and areas that are all coming to Bingtown. And so the old traders are losing their sense of prestige, but they're also having to sell off their lands because they don't have enough income to survive otherwise, because everything is difficult because of the war that happened. So we have Ronica and Kefria who are trying to navigate that and deal with all of this economic uncertainty as well as social and political unrest. And then the kids, like I said, Wintrow is off on the ship with his father, but Malta and Selden are at home. And now, let me say, in the first book, Malta, who is 12, oh my goodness, I've never disliked a child character more. And it's perfect. She's perfectly written. It all makes sense. And her character grows and develops. But in that first book, it made me so happy to be a monk and never have to worry about taking care of a 12-year-old girl. Whoa, she is a difficult character. I think she's great. She's really phenomenal. The way she's written, at least. I don't want to spend time with her. She's really diabolical in many ways. But so you have Ronica and Kefria, and then the 2 younger children, Malta and Selden, at the home front trying to deal with that. And they're also interacting with people from the Rain Wilds, so the community that's farther up the river, who they have a pact with, and they have, trading and economic relationships with. And then Althea is off on a ship because she couldn't get on her own ship, so she's trying to figure out a way to prove that she is a worthy sailor so that she can come back and take control of what she believes is her destiny and her family's ship. So these are the states of play in the first book. You also follow this pirate named Kenneth, who is making a name for himself, and you can imagine that he is going to, of course, intersect with our main characters. He fancies himself as the king of the pirates. He wants to be a king of the pirates. Of course, pirates don't want anyone to tell them what to do. So there's a little bit of a tension there, right? That he wants to see himself as this great ruler that people look up to, but no one wants to be ruled if they are already pirates. Now, in general, I would say the world building and the atmosphere is wonderful. A lot of this story takes place on boats, whether it be the Vivacia, which is the live ship of our family that we're following, or another live ship, or on Kenneth's boat, this pirate boat, or all these other things. And you really feel like you're there. And there's different types of boats. So one of the big themes that comes up is this idea of slavery. So one of the neighboring countries, Chalced, they promote slavery and they have slaves. Now, for a long time, Bingtown has been against slaves, but slowly that is where there is money to be made. So they're getting more lax in their dealing of buying and selling human beings. And right away, Kyle makes their ship into a slave ship, and they're going to start trading in slaves. And the way that is depicted and what it's like to be on a ship that is carrying human cargo is so vivid and really hard to read. And she does a great job of just making you feel whatever type of ship you're on, wherever you are in the ocean, whether you have a beautiful landscape in front of you or you're in the middle of a storm or it's a peaceful day with the sun reflecting off of the waves, whatever it is, you feel like you're there. She does a really great job of building the atmosphere and making you feel like you're on a ship. And there are different types of ships and they all feel different, right? You have a good sense of the geography of the ships. The geography of the world is a little harder because it's such a big world, and the amount of time it takes to travel from one place to another isn't always entirely clear. There are some maps at the beginning of the book. Maps are always nice, but it never feels magical. Like, people don't travel really long distances overnight. There's always effort involved in getting from one place to another, and there's a lot of time that goes on. That's a big problem for the folks that are back home, Ronica and Kefria, and those who are dealing with the issues at home, is that it's hard to get word about what's going on. When a live ship goes out, it may not come back for 6 months. So they have to wait. And so much of their livelihood is dependent upon what happens when that ship gets back. In addition to being out in the ocean, you also obviously have Big Town, and then you have the Rain Wilds. Those are the three main kind of sites of things happening, and all of them are distinct. They all are built up in really interesting and exciting ways. You do get to see some other countries and some other ports, which are all unique. And I think across the board, there is a port that is where all the pirates go to kind of unload whatever booty they have stolen from other ships. And then you get to visit some ports that are high trader ports, but that are more legitimate, though, that aren't, for pirates, but are for regular traders. Yet the traders, obviously very blue collar, all these sailors. So what the port looks like, and then what the trading town looks like as you get beyond the port side, and all these things are really, really well thought out and really well developed, and you feel like you're there. So the world building, the atmosphere, I think is all expertly done. But again, what is most important is the characters. These characters we follow, all of them are complicated and interesting, and they all go on these journeys. Like I said, the story takes place over a couple of years, and so not one of them is unchanged by the end. Okay, and so I won't go into more details about the individual characters because it would, give away a lot of their story. But that really is where the heart of the story lies, at least for me. And the reason reading almost 3,000 pages goes by in, the blink of an eye, because you get so invested in these characters and seeing the journey they go on and seeing how they grow in really meaningful ways. It was just really exciting, and it made all of their adventures that much more tense, right? Because you really became invested in these characters. At least I did, because none of them felt flat. None of them felt two-dimensional. None of them felt like they were just placeholders. Even the ones that were ancillary characters, like the first mate on a ship, that could have just been, a space filler, has an identity, has something to bring to the story, right? Is affecting the overall story in meaningful ways. So every one of the characters, like, that is really where Robin Hobb excels, I think. The characters make you care about the story. And so whatever adventures are going on are important because you want to go on those adventures with these characters. When there's peril, you care about these characters. You want them to have, positive outcomes or not positive outcomes. And, I guess I was going to say this for the end of the review, but one of the things that I found by the end of the series, one of the things I found most compelling. Now, this is a spoiler-free review, so I'm not going to say what happens at the end, but you can assume, Robin Hobb not being a grimdark author, that it's generally a happy ending, right? That for the most part, most of our characters are satisfied or have some level of satisfaction at the end, okay? There is a lot of pain to get there. There is death, there is trauma, there is hardship over and over again. Things don't go the way our characters want them to go, but in the end, the overall story has a more or less happy ending. Okay, I don't think that's spoiling anything to say that. And yet, what I found really compelling is that there are a few characters along the way who are really horrible, and you as a reader, as well as other characters, really want really bad things to happen to them, right? That you feel that they deserve to be punished for what they've done and for who they are and for the trauma and pain they've inflicted on others. And the punishments they receive, right? Whether it be punishments, human punishments, or just narrative punishments. And so those punishments they receive don't always satisfy the bloodlust that you want them to. And it's on purpose. And it's really telling, because one of the things that Hobb is looking at, one of her ideas, is what does justice look like, right? And what does revenge look like? And what does that do to you as a person? How is wanting to hurt others because you've been hurt, how does that only perpetuate more violence and never bring about satisfaction or any sort of emotional peace? And because of that, you find yourself rooting against these characters, and you want really, really awful things to happen to them. And even if they don't succeed in all of their goals, or even if they do end up, being punished to some extent, it isn't necessarily the level of punishment doesn't seem like it fits the crime, let's say. on some occasions, not all the time, but on some occasions. And that, I think, is incredible. That is a really smart way to write the story, because she builds up your expectations. And in so many stories, you see the bad guy get exactly what's coming to them, right? And here, it's not that satisfying, because it's showing you, why would that be satisfying? Why would more violence be satisfying? Why is that what you want, right? Robin Hobb is very explicitly asking you, is this violence going to fix your own pain, right? Is this how you heal yourself? By hurting others or by seeing others hurt? How does that help you? And I think that's great that she doesn't let you off the hook, either, nor her characters. And her characters have to reckon with that emotion themselves. When I got to the end and I realized that, and it forced me to look at my own emotional experience. And look, not only am I a Buddhist monk, I am a prison abolitionist, right? I want to get rid of the whole system. And yet in my fantasy, I expect something else. Not necessarily because I want it, because I've grown accustomed to expecting it. And she doesn't give it to you here. And she forced me to look at my own expectations of what happens to bad guys in stories, and why that itself, that expectation, is harmful to me and to the world of the story. So I was really, really excited when I got to the end and realized that she disrupted my expectations in that way. But that isn't all that Robin Hobb has to say in this story. There are a lot of ideas that she is playing with and a lot of things she's looking at. So in the last bit of this review, instead of going more into the plot, because there's so many little side stories and adventures they go on, instead of talking about any of those, because that would just take another few hours, I want to talk about some of the themes that she explores in this series. I think one of the overarching ones, obviously, is the gender roles and what does it mean to be a woman in this world. And what's interesting is that in Bingtown, traditionally, women had more power generations ago, and they were looked at as equals to the men. And a lot of the men did the sailing, but, our main character's great-great-grandmother is the one that first captained that ship, right? So somehow they have been influenced throughout generations for women to have a more passive role. And the society has developed into a more patriarchal society. And you look at societies around Bingtown, and some of them are more extremely patriarchal, whereas others are more equal and have gender parity. And so the idea is of, who is capable of running a ship and who is capable of running a household and doing all the accounts and managing all of the financial assets of a family. These are, what role does gender play into your interactions with your peers and with others, whether it be in a trading environment or on a ship or in anything else? These are all questions that are very explicitly asked, especially as one of our characters, Althea, is really trying to make a name for herself and prove that she deserves her family ship and it shouldn't have gone to Kyle. So obviously gender is one of the first things that is being explored. And I think it's done, especially because you see her sister, Kefria, and her daughter, Malta, especially at the beginning, they want to adopt this patriarchal idea of what a woman's role is because they feel like it's easier. They don't want to go out and do hard work, quote unquote. They want to be taken care of, especially Malta, this young girl, because she's so influenced by these newcomers that are coming to town that she thinks it's her role to wear pretty dresses and to have people court her and give her things. And all she has to do is just kind of, accept suitors and be beautiful, right? That is her idea of a woman's place in the world. The idea, like her grandmother is out there doing work in the fields, and she's like, that's disgusting. Who would ever do that? That's not what we should be doing as women. And so you see this generational shift due to the influences of newcomers coming to the society, right? And that's another big plot point that you're exploring is social and political organization of community and how that community has to deal with newcomers, new ideas, some of which are positive and bring about growth and positive change. Others seem to bring about exploitation, right? Such as the idea of slavery. So obviously slavery is another big thing that she's tackling. And really, she's tackling it in a very blunt way in that it's evil and everything about it is evil and there's nothing good about it ever. But to see some characters wrestle with it and some characters try to say, look, we're not really slavers. We're just moving product from one place to another. We don't own slaves ourselves. Some characters try to find some sort of gray zone that they can live in to justify them using slaves as a way to bolster their own economic misfortunes. Like, you see them struggling with it, and it's really compelling to see these characters have this moral dilemma. But there are these big questions about tradition and about inheritance and about what do we carry on from our ancestors, the original settlers of the cursed shores and of the rain wilds, and the commitments they made and the promises that were made to them by the government, as a colony essentially of Jamalia. Like, what promises were made to them, what treaties were made, what is the point of those treaties, and maybe it's time that they do have to change. Maybe in order to protect what is most important about their way of life, they do have to start accepting others into their community and do it wholeheartedly. Because if you're able to accept others, then you don't feel like you're fighting, right? So instead of losing your culture because you're fighting with others who want to come occupy the same space as you, you open up your culture to invite others in and everything can grow together. Maybe that's a possibility, but that isn't easy to come to, right? When you've held tight to your traditions for so long and you think that these people are outsiders who are trying to take something away from me. So this idea of tradition, of custom, of outsider versus insider, kind of a little bit of ingrained xenophobia even in all of our heroes, is a really interesting thing to play with. And so Robin Hobb is explicitly addressing these issues as well. A big part of it is like, what does it mean to be a free person in a market economy where your self-worth is directly related to your economic worth? And that is dependent on so many factors outside of your control, especially when you compare some of our traders and the society they have there to society of freed slaves and to societies of the pirates have kind of cobbled together. So these pseudo-anarchist societies where what they value is entirely different, right? Or is it different? That's the question. Maybe there's something about human nature that is always drawn or always organizes itself around greed and attachment and wanting more for yourself and less for others. And that just manifests differently depending on the environment. That's also a possibility. And so Hobb doesn't give you an easy answer. She's showing different ways of being, different communities, different societies. And so seeing our main characters travel across these different societies, different communities, you learn more about our characters to see how they engage with these different type of social or political organization. Now, on top of all this, I think one of the big things is this idea of personal accountability. What does it mean to be true to yourself? I think one of the main characters, Wintro, the young boy, who is pulled away from his monastery and forced to live on the ship where he doesn't want to live, especially in the first book, all he wants to do is escape from the ship, escape from his father, who he has no affection for, and go back to his monastery. And of course, the ship feels that. So the ship feels his resentment. And yet the ship is dependent upon him for her own emotional well-being. And the inner journey he goes on, right? There are some moments in that first section that are just really heartbreaking. And his exploration of his faith. What does it mean to be a good priest when everything you think it means to be a priest is taken away from you? This idea of leading a spiritual life outside of the trappings of a spiritual life, right? That's a really interesting question that Hobb is playing with. And not everyone here, not everyone in the story follows the same religious ideas, and they don't all agree with like a spiritual life. A lot of the sailors especially kind of make fun of him for being a priest and for caring of having any sort of spiritual life. But as a character, he goes through so much growth and change over the course of even the first book, never mind all three books. These ideas of what does it mean to live a meaningful life, even if you don't have any control over your circumstances. How to find peace and calm and tranquility within yourself in such a way that you can make every moment of your life meaningful and beneficial for yourself and for others. So that's something he is constantly striving to do when he finds himself in the most heartbreaking and destructive of circumstances. And you see that with many other characters as well. This idea of personal accountability, of being in control of your own destiny, regardless of the fact that you can't control the circumstances. You can't control what's happening around you, but you can control how you react to it. You can control what pieces you grab onto and what pieces you let go of. And you see that. All of our characters have to face that in one way or another, as some of them succeed and some don't. Some are constantly holding on to the things that bring them pain, that bring them misery, and they're constantly causing themselves more and more suffering. And they blame it on everything outside of themselves. But as reader, we can see the reason they are in such misery is because they're holding on so tightly to something that is nothing but, sharp edges, that all they're going to do is cause themselves to bleed. And yet they can't see it. So that is just yet another interesting idea that Robin Hobb is exploring in this story, is what does it mean to take personal accountability? And what does it mean to have some modicum of control of your own destiny? And now for anyone who has made it all the way to the end of this incredibly long review, I should also say that there are non-human characters as well. There's this whole obsession with these giant sea serpents. And in the first book, there's just a few sections here and there where you're following the sea serpents. And then in the second book, there are more sea serpent sections. And in the third book, there are even more. And they become critical to the story. And you find out why in the second book, why they become so critical. And as the third novel evolves, the role of the sea serpents and other non-human characters kind of explodes to being really important, and it also changes the whole landscape of the world as we know it, which is going to have huge ramifications for the next series and for the world we think we knew that we learned about in the Farseer trilogy. There isn't quite as much magic in the Liveship Traders trilogy as there is in the Farseer trilogy. There are these living ships, which I suppose are magic, but to some extent, you kind of become accustomed to it pretty quickly. Whereas there are actual kind of magical or supernatural abilities in the Farseer trilogy, and there is the skill and the wit, which are both these kind of I guess you could say some sort of like a psychic or telekinetic powers that can be cultivated in individuals. So there is like a more explicit magic system in the first trilogy. Here you don't see that magic system, but you see these fantastical beasts in the shape of these sentient boats, but then these giant sea serpents, and eventually, yes, dragons as well. Dragons play such an important part in the mythos of the realm of the Elderlings because dragons are inherently connected to the Elderlings, who are this ancient civilization that we're trying to learn more and more about. And so, in amidst this fast-paced, emotional, character-driven journey that is full of all these small adventures, yet they weave in and out of each other to come to this really satisfying conclusion where all of the separate storylines make sense as one tightly interwoven, tapestry. On top of all of that, which in and of itself is exciting, you have these fantastical creatures who are literally reshaping how you understand the world in really exciting ways that, make me really anxious to pick up the next book and to continue in this series because it changes so many things. I think, though, I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. I don't know how much more I have to say without going into more details, but the world building and the atmosphere and the vibes across the board are great. They build on what you already knew from the Farseer trilogy, and they make it more robust, more exciting. They expand the world, both in a geographic sense, but also just in a conceptual sense. The characters are where the heart of the story is. All of the characters, and there are many of them, are complicated, they're deep, they're interesting. Some of them you just want to hang out with all the time. Others you want to get as far away from as possible. At least, narratively, you want to spend time with them because they're interesting, but you would not want to hang out with them. Yet every single character, from the lowest to the low to the most exciting, they go on these really profound journeys over the course of the 2 or 3 years that is the span of these 3 books. And to be part of those journeys, to witness that inner transformation is really exciting and really fun. And that affects all of the stories, the adventures that happen, and there's all sorts of different types of adventures. Some of them on the high seas. There are some battles on the high seas between pirates and other ships. There are battles and fights with these sea serpents whose very skin is acidic and burns. And then, of course, there's all of the turmoil in town and all of the unrest, civil unrest and social unrest, and what it means for newcomers and the old-timers, and what happens when there's a clash of cultures, all that's happening at the same time. So you have all of these little adventures happening, and all of those feed into the characters. All of those are experienced through the lens of really powerful character exploration. So the characters are great. The world building is great, as I mentioned. I think the writing itself is strong, it's descriptive, it flows, it really is fast moving, even though it is long, right? So that's the one thing, it's long. It doesn't feel long, at least it didn't feel long to me. I was so invested in these characters that I wanted to spend more time with them. And the only reason I wanted the last book to end is because it changed the world so much, and it did so many things to my understanding of the world that she'd built for our main character, Fitz, in the Farseer trilogy, that I really want to get back to him because I want to see how these changes in the world are going to affect his life. That's the only reason I wanted the 3rd book to end, is so I could start reading the next book. That's really it. So I have nothing but good things to say about this trilogy. I loved it. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Have any of you read this trilogy? Are you hoping to? Have you read any of the other books in the realm of the Elderling series? What do you think about a 3,000-page story? Maybe that is a little too long. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this and anything else down below in the comments. But for now, I'll say thank you for spending such a long time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.